Welcome to another episode of Build Better Brands. Today I am joined by Andy Starr. I don't really know how to introduce you, Andy.
I don't know either, but I know you can do a better job than I can.
I'm not too sure I can. You've had quite a journey from delving into finance to jamming with bands and a guy called James Taylor, and now being co-founder of Level C with the world-renowned Marty Neumeier. You certainly know a thing or two about branding. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. See, it's way better than anything I could have come up with. So,
Wow. I want to hear what you'd have come up with now. What would you have said?
I think if you ask me any roundabout kind of questions that I'm anticipating from you, I'm going to have some things to say. So,
Okay. Interesting. So I met Andy having participated in Level C this year of the time of this recording. And yeah, Andy's really opened my eyes to what being disruptive is all about when it comes to branding. And yeah, you mentioned that word quite a lot during the masterclass. I should have counted. You shared stories around um, someone being extremely disruptive during the masterclass and being quite shocking with some of the ideas that they came out with, which I
mhm.
found the word that keeps coming up is uncomfortable. Can you talk to us about what being disruptive is and why it's something that you're constantly kind of banging on about?
Well, we talk about this idea of disruption and disruptive thinking in a we start talking about it in a specific context, right? We the first thing we talk about in level C is this idea of differentiation, right? Being different, standing out, being unique, um, and we eventually get to this point where we make an argument. We don't declare anything. We don't say this is the way it is, and anyone else who says otherwise is wrong. We just make an argument, right? And our argument is that being different isn't enough. It's not enough these days. If you're a brand, if you're a business and you're trying to stand out and you think that just being different will get you there, we make an argument that it won't, that it's not enough. It's not even a bare minimum anymore. And if you believe in that, if you can kind of like be cool with that idea, then you can follow us into the next part of our argument, which is you want to try to be disruptive. And we talk about what the difference is, right? And we don't just define it, we don't just give examples of it, but we share frameworks and definitions and try to shape the way you think about all of these concepts, right? Differentiation is a concept, brand is a concept, the idea of branding is a concept. And we're we try to shape the way or change or reshape the way that you think about things like that. But that's our baseline. That's where we start. And one of the reasons we do that is because before we talk about things like strategy and strategic thinking, brand strategy, marketing strategy, product strategy, just the idea of strategy as a standalone thing, we want to build all of that on this foundation of disruptive thinking because you actually need that if you're going to get into all of these other things. Okay. So for us, it's the starting point, it's the foundation, it's a mantra, right? And if we had to boil level C down really to a single word, a single concept of all the concepts that we talk about, it's usually disruption.
Okay.
That's why we talk about it so much,
Mm.
and um, even level C as a business, as an idea before it became a business, um, was anchored in disruption. When I had my first conversation with this guy named Marty Neumeier, you know, it
Who?
was it yeah, right. It was its own disruption. The thing is, I never really got the idea of disruptive thinking until I started working with him. I was always an outcast thinker. I was always inclined to some kind of, quote unquote, zag. Title of his book,
Yeah.
that's a mindset, right? I was always inclined to think that way and to act that way, and usually I did that to my own detriment. And I made things probably a lot harder for myself through my career. But I didn't really understand. I really wasn't able to think about what disruption means and what its broader value was until Marty and I partnered up. And Level C has been legit disruptive. It started as a side hustle project. It's still a side hustle project for all intents and purposes. But I'm not saying Level C has been legit disruptive because I'm saying it or because Marty says it. It's disruptive because that's what everyone else has said. you
But
know
yeah.
and when we started, our vision for this whole thing was this masterclass style program of workshops, and in the beginning it was targeted at more kind of advanced, mid-career, mid-level, C-suite targeted professionals. Okay. And at some point, maybe like 2 years or 10 classes into this whole thing, people weren't just describing us as being disruptive, they were describing us as a Bauhaus of branding. And they were saying that we didn't say that. And when we heard that, we were like stunned. Okay. And when the stun wore off, we were actually really inspired because that descriptor, Bauhaus of branding, the Bauhaus was its own disruptive institution. It was its
It,
own disruptive mindset and movement
yeah.
that's still relevant. And so when people started describing us that way, that disrupted our own view, our own approach to what we've been doing and how we've been doing it. And it provoked us to about how we could start thinking outside of our own box and start pulling on that kind of Bauhaus thread. And we're still pulling on it, right?
Mm.
But for us, it starts with that ability, that willingness, right? That comfort with the discomfort of disruption.
Mm.
That's our jam. It has always been that way. It almost certainly will always be that way.
How did you even begin to start having these conversations with Marty? He's one of the world's kind of most renowned figures when it comes to creativity and branding and design.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how did you how did you convince him to work with you?
Well, see, that's like it's actually a misconception. I know most people think that I was the one who convinced him. I approached him,
Mm.
but I didn't convince him. He actually convinced me more than I convinced him. So I had an idea. I pitched an idea. It it inspired what turned out to be kind of mutual visions for teaching brand that he and I both had. Okay. When I pitched him, I was working, I was working with a startup, and the startup was kind of moving in the direction of education. Okay. But at some point the startup kind of collapsed on itself and I moved on. But Marty and I kept talking. It was kind of weird for me because, he's Marty Neumeier, right? He's been my professional hero. He was my professional hero before I met him. He was an unintended mentor from a distance who didn't even know I existed, didn't know he was having this impact on me. But after we began talking and I moved on from this startup, I began waking up in the morning and there would be another email in my inbox from Marty Neumeier. Like, that was wild shit. It's
Yeah,
like, if
that's
there's an
freaking
email like that,
common.
I'm going to respond.
Of course.
And those emails started to say things like, why don't we Skype today and talk? And it's like, okay. And so we'd schedule like a 30-minute, 45-minute Skype session, and they would turn into like 3-hour jams. Like, literally, like, no bullshit.
Mm.
We just talked and ideated. And each jam became like its own epic thing. And then sometimes they would turn into like its own kind of masterclass. But it wasn't just Marty talking to me. I was talking to him, and I would lead him into like these like explorations of methods of teaching. Like, we would talk about the Socratic method that's used to teach in law school. I went to law school once upon a time. Um,
What?
we would talk about the way music theory was taught to me at the Berklee College of Music, where I studied music. And I would talk to him about how I would take what I learned in the class and apply it to my instrument, in a lab, right? When we were talking about all of these things, right? It wasn't just me saying like, tell me what you think about brand strategy. Tell me how I can sell brand strategy. Never had conversations like that. And at some point, he invited me to his home in Santa Barbara. And I was like, fuck, really? And it was like, the whole point of it was he wanted to lock ourselves away in his home studio for a long weekend just to see what we could create.
That's
It wasn't
cool,
to
man.
strategize, it wasn't to plan, it was just to create. It was like a litmus test. Okay. And that alone was mind blowing. The dude invites me into his home. I met his wife, Eileen, figured out really fast that she was like the oracle behind the oracle. Right. But I'm in his house. I've posted pictures about this. I'll be posting more because we're coming up on like the anniversary of when we started.
Wow,
Right.
that's
And it was
cool.
surreal, but that's what we did. We jammed and we jammed and we jammed. It was pure creativity mode. Right. And it was at a level of maturity and professionalism that was like intimidating to me. I thought I had my shit kind of buttoned up tight, but that was like next level. And in 3 days, we had this idea of level C envisioned, blueprinted, modeled. And at some point I said to him, hey, what if we dropped an Easter egg into like the ether just to see how people would react? He was like, sure, let's go. And I think we posted something on his LinkedIn and Twitter accounts about a new branding workshop that would be designed and led by Marty Neumeier. And before I left Santa Barbara, we had like 50 people committed to a masterclass that hadn't been priced, hadn't been scheduled. It hadn't even been like Eventbrited, right? And there was already a wait list like building on it. So, again, I didn't convince him though. He more convinced me. He said to me, there was no way to guarantee that this was going to work. He did say there was virtually a guarantee that we would make no money, right? And at the time, I was in one of those kind of moments in one's life where I was really transitioning professionally and personally. I had lost my parents. Both of my parents had passed away back to back shortly before Marty and I got together. I was totally jaded with the landscape. I'd given up on working with agencies. It was just a waste, right? And I was deeply, deeply lost, right? And in many ways, the idea of trying to create what we were talking about creating, to borrow to borrow from our buddies at Liquid Death, it was literally the dumbest fucking idea at the time. It was the dumbest thing I could have done at the time. But Marty Neumeier was basically asking me to do this with him. He wasn't asking anyone else. And so between that and my own feelings that I had at the time, this feeling of like I had nothing to lose, it didn't actually take a lot of convincing. And the reason is, and this goes kind of back to your question about disruption, the guy with nothing to lose is more dangerous, but more capable than the guy with anything to lose. And that's the guy Marty was talking to at the time. Marty arguably had more to lose than I did, and he still tapped me to do this. And I
Yeah,
think if
it's
you
like how
asked
can
him,
you say you can't really say no to that? I mean you
I,
could
I
have, but
could I could have, but I had nothing to lose.
yeah.
And that gave me a very odd confidence of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to even think about doing this with someone like him, but I have nothing to lose by trying.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if you asked him, he'd probably say that he recognized that. And that's one of the reasons why he tapped me. And by the way, for what it's worth, um, I actually haven't really shared this out loud. I actually think that I've lost a little bit of that along the way. Okay.
What, like
I've built,
no fear.
well, I've built this amazing program. I've been serving this amazing audience, and I've been doing it in the most amazing partnership with Marty Neumeier. But over the last year or so, I've actually come to feel like I have a lot to lose. Actually, I have that to lose. And that's had a profound effect on me in the last year in a way that most people wouldn't recognize, but I have no shame about that. Right. It's affected me, and not in a good way. I believe that it's compromised my own role in level C, the value that I bring, and especially in where it's been headed. Um, but for you and for whoever listens to this, that's about to change, right? Like I'm going back to my roots. I'm going back to my roots with Marty. We've had a lot of conversations about this recently, right? And I'm going back to the guy that Marty tapped. We're going back to the roots, even with what we teach and how we teach it. Um, that's who built Level C with him.
Yeah.
That's who Marty trusted to do that. It's who he's trusted with his own content, his own IP. Um, it's like when I post on social media and I tag Marty, I'm tagging my partner. The guy who asked me to do this with him. I'm not tagging him for reach. I don't tag to brag. I don't whore him out. He's my partner. But he kind of convinced me more than I convinced him.
Wow. That is interesting. Because yeah, and I'll be perfectly honest, I was under the assumption that it was the other way around, and it's so interesting that you were, because of where you were, that stage in your life, having suffered loss.
Hmm?
Bloody hell, I know what that feels like, and being in a position where you're like, well, actually, things are a bit shit, so this is an opportunity. Let's just do it. It's when you're in that position and your chips are down, you either go one or two ways, and you went the other way. Um, what I found interesting as well, kind of looking at, there's not a lot about you out there, Randy.
There's not. I'm not famous. Like
I
I'm
was
just
naturally,
normal.
obviously I know of you through LinkedIn and through our mutual
Mm-hmm.
connections like Wes and Matt. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to be having a conversation. I'm going to be professional. I'm going to do my homework and do some research. I could barely
Mm-hmm.
find anything apart from you talking about jamming with a guy called James Taylor.
Yeah.
Um, who is he?
James Taylor. James Taylor is a famous singer-songwriter. He's won a bunch of Grammys over his
Okay,
career. He's like Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think he sold. I definitely think he sold over 100 million records in his career. But yeah, he's a
okay. And now
famous
I'm
singer-songwriter.
googling James Taylor and wondering why I
Yeah.
didn't. Um, and then also you weren't in music, like you didn't come from branding. You talked about being involved in music and also finance. What? Why? How on earth did you end up delving into finance? Like I hear finance and I run a mile.
I did too. But so I guess the short version is, my arc to get here has been, I guess, unconventional if you have the perception that people who work in brand only have ever worked in brand. But number one, that's not the case. Um, but yeah, I was an English literature major at a tiny little liberal arts college in the Northeast US. I studied Shakespeare and art and philosophy, and I had a very, well-rounded, multidisciplinary liberal arts education. And then I went to music school because I fell into music and performance. And after music school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Um, and my father, uh, my father was a lawyer by training, but was working in private banking. And he said, come learn the business, see if you like it. And I was like, okay, not because I was interested in finance, but because I loved my father. We were extremely close, and he was an intellectual hero of mine. And I wasn't going to say no to him. And so I worked with him in finance, and I learned finance for 8 years. And then, as it happens with a lot of people, I met a girl who worked in advertising, design, and branding. And her father was known in branding. Marty knew him. He knew Marty. He was basically, a contemporary of Marty's. And so branding kind of fell on me. Okay. It fell on me while I was in law school. That's one of the reasons why I walked away from a career in law, and because I was better at this thing called branding, but I had no idea what it was. And so all of that happened before I knew who Marty Neumeier was, before I read any of his books. Um, but yeah, I mean, that was the first half of my career.
Wow. Okay. You've got some really diverse experiences there.
I
Um,
do.
music, law, finance,
Mm-hmm.
being involved in your dad's business, and then
Mm-hmm.
kind of moving then into branding. And how is that? How have those experiences shaped the way that you work now and the way in which you're educating and teaching those that want to understand brand and um, how to do it well, how to do it differently?
It's the effect has been profound. Um, it's difficult to describe because there are so many parts to it. I would say this. Yes, my approach, like what I've brought to this equation with Marty, it was shaped by all of those experiences. It was especially shaped by my learning experiences, first in the liberal arts, and then in music school, and then in law school, right? And we're talking about this arc of critical thinking, analytical thinking, uh, 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 creative thinking, strategic thinking, creative arts. Okay, music school was creative arts,
Mm,
and then in law school, I mentioned before this Socratic method, and the Socratic method is this method of teaching and learning. It's also critical and analytical thinking. It's a little different, right? But the common thread through all of that was thinking, changing the way you think, and that I was very aware of it. Um, when I started law school, I started with the very clear understanding that, and by the way, law school is my favorite analogy for what we're trying to do in level C. Law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. It's what a lot of people, at least outside of law, they don't understand. Law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. It teaches you how to think like a lawyer.
got
Okay.
you.
And
Okay.
then you go into the world and you practice law. That's why they call
A
a law
practice.
exactly.
That's just like been an aha moment for me. That
Yeah.
has, yeah.
It's you practice applying that
Mm.
way of thinking. And as you do that, the way you think continues to be shaped and shaped and shaped. Okay. And when we started, I was the one who was saying to Marty, you know, how to think about brand. That was the difference for me. When I read Marty's first book, The Brand Gap, I've told this story before. My my ex at the time who worked in this space, she had the book. I had seen it on the bookshelf forever. I didn't know anything about it, but she put it in my hands. I had never seen a book like it. I opened it up, and next thing I knew, I had been up all night reading. I finished The Brand Gap overnight, and I remember the next morning putting it down, and the way I thought about everything, the way I thought about business, the way I thought about people, the way I thought about myself was fundamentally different. And I had a lot of time to think about that and think about what it meant, how I could wrap my arms around it, how I could internalize it, how I could come to command it, right? But I was very aware that it changed the way I think. And when he and I started working together, that was my starting point with him. I said, that is fucking bonkers. And the value of that is insane. And so Marty and I don't teach you how to brand. We don't teach you how to do strategy. We don't teach you how to be a brand strategist, right? We teach you how to think. And
Yeah.
everyone else out there claims to teach you how to do. We came along and agreed to say that we'll teach you how to think, because honestly, there's too much doing. There's enough doing, right? And more of it isn't very good. We focus on thinking. That's what we do. Creative thinking, strategic thinking, design thinking.
Mm.
And, you know, more and more so-called experts and coaches and mentors out there, they've been doing the whole how to do thing, how to do this, how to make, how to use this template, all that shit. More and more of them have been trying to copy us now. And it's kind of weird because they end up almost completely contradicting what they were doing just a couple of years ago, but they still just talk about thinking and creativity. But they're still selling doing and productivity. We're all suffering under this misguided overemphasis on productivity. The world doesn't need more productivity. It needs more creativity. That's what's going to solve problems. Being productive doesn't guarantee that you're going to solve a problem. We believe that creativity is more likely, more valuable in problem solving than just being more productive. But it needs more people who are able to think about what they do before they do it, while they do it, and after they do it. And
Yeah.
so all of that, my background really influenced my approach to teaching this thing with Marty. Marty comes from a creative design background, but he's like the most strategic, creative designer alive, like hands down, period, mic drop. Right. And so he brings that whole background with him, and it just lines up. It just works.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I find interesting is, so when you have conversations with people, especially adults that aren't aware of the creative industry of branding, they don't understand it. Um it can be difficult sometimes to get them to realize the importance of it. And I have these conversations a lot, and you see it in schools that when you look at the lessons that are being taught in schools and the things that are on the curriculum, especially in the UK, I don't know if it's different in the US, but creativity is becoming more and more obsolete. The arts, music,
mm,
DT, they're slowly kind of being pushed out, and there's this, I mean, a lot of my friends are teachers, and the things that they are having to prioritize are things like maths and English and science, and trying to get funding for STEM as well,
Yeah.
actually, science, technology, engineering, and things like that. Engineering, it's proving more and more difficult.
Hmm.
Yet when we look at the world around us, we understand how valuable it is. And then when you start having conversations with people and say, well, think about how much creativity and thinking has impacted your life. What are you sat on? What are you using? How do you travel to work? You use a road, someone's designed that system, and it's everywhere. Yet it's not something that is being encouraged. I see it going the other way.
It's that's that is its own podcast episode.
Yeah, I know.
But I would say this: the pendulum swings. So for a long time in the aughts and the teens, the pendulum was swinging on the side. It was kind of on the side of STEM programs, STEM curriculums, um, hard skills. All right. It's been swinging back. Okay. I worked with, at some point along this second half of my career, I did some rotations at different branding agencies, and I was able to experience working with higher education clients, colleges and universities. Um, it's a category I care very much about. It's one of maybe only two categories I would consider working with. I really only want to work with at this point if I take a consulting gig. Um, but I follow it, and so the pendulum has started swinging back to a more rounded curriculum. Okay, the hard skills will always be in demand, and they will become a competitive advantage. However, where people have no idea at this point where we're all going to land in 5 years, right? Let alone the next 10 or 20 years. There are certain things that, if you know the philosophical thinker Noam Harari, uh, he was just on one of the American late night shows last week, and he was asked, where does he think people are going to be in 20 years? And he said, we have no idea. No one really knows at this point. Really, for the first time in history, none of us know. This is like our job. Our job is to think about these things and anticipate. We have no idea where we're going to land, what the world is going to look like, or what we're going to need to know or be able to do when we get there. Whereas, hundreds of years ago, you could look 20 years in the future and say things like, well, we know we're going to need how to farm, and we're going to need to understand agriculture. We're going to need to know how to ride horses and all of that jazz. Now that's a little different. However, here's what we are going to need to know how to do 5 years from now, 10, 20, 50 years from now. We're going to have to know how to read, write, communicate, think. Okay. We're going to need to know how to do those things. We're going to need to know how to be creative, innovative. You want to talk about innovation. Where do you think innovation comes from?
Not AI.
AI is a tool. AI
Yeah,
is a tool. It's not a
absolutely.
replacement. It's a
No.
tool.
Yeah.
But just talking about the idea of innovation, talking about the art of design thinking, where do you think those things start? Creativity. Where
Mm.
do you think strategy starts? Are you taking our strategy class with us next week?
No.
Oh, shame on you. But when you do, I'm not spoiling anything. People have asked, why do we teach strategy after disruptive and creative thinking?
Mm.
Doesn't make sense for people. Everyone says
It,
you have to
it
start with you have to
it
start
didn't
with
make sense
strategy.
for me. It didn't.
Already, what strategy Strategy is, I'm just going to give you the class right now. Ready? Strategy is the art of designing advantage. That's it. That's what strategy is. It's what it means. It's what you're trying to do. Advantage. You boil strategy down to a word, it's advantage. Well, what is advantage? Advantage comes from the old French word avant, which means in front. Advantage is in front of you. It's in the future. Strategy is about the future. You don't design strategy for the past. And you don't actually design strategy for the present. You design strategy for the future. It's creating the future. You're designing the future. To do that, you have to imagine the future. You have to think and decide, what do you want the future to be?
Yeah. What's your goal?
What do you want the advantage? What your goal, your vision, the common thread, the through line, right? Is you have to start by imagining what you want based on what you may need, based on what you just may think you want to try, what you're interested in. Doesn't matter. It still starts with imagination. Okay? That's something that we see most so-called strategists, they don't get. They don't get. They think it's 100% rational. They think it's data-driven. They think it can be processed. It can be formulated. It can be templated. Fuck that. Bullshit. Doesn't work that way. Okay. So we talk about creativity and disruptive thinking before strategy because you need that if you want to do strategy. It's not the other way around. You don't start with strategy and then jump into creative. That's not how it works. Never has, never will. When people try to do it that way, when people try to sell that to others, when other people teach it that way and create this kind of army of imposter strategists, it makes us really sad, but only for a second, because that's not what we're doing.
Okay.
I don't know if I answered your original question, but shit, I tried.
We were talking about creativity in the world and it being needed, but not necessarily something that is being focused on, especially in education. I'm a visiting lecturer and I happen to teach on graphic design and visual communication, so I'm always kind of banging that drum. But a lot of my friends are teachers, and it can be frustrating, because my mindset is, well, how do you think problems get solved? It's through creative thinking. So I'm trying to champion that.
Creativity and the arts, right? They're not a part of modern business curriculums, right?
No, no.
And they should be. One of our friends, Marty's and mine, is the famous management thinker and strategist Roger Martin. Easily one of the smartest dudes alive. And he's had a huge influence on the way both Marty and I think about strategy, about business more broadly. And Roger was the dean of the business school at the Rothman School of Business in Toronto, and he's been talking about this problem for years now. That just like Marty wrote about how there's a gap between creativity and strategy. Well, there's not even a gap. There's a void of creativity, of the arts, of art and design in business schools, and that's not the way it should be. And that has been a big thing with us in Level C. We're trying to bridge that gap. We're trying to fill that void. And you mentioned that you're a visiting lecturer. I'm actually, next year, I'm going to start a professorship at a European business school. And my requirement was that I have the ability to start bridging that gap, to bring art and business together, to bring creativity and strategy together, to fill that void, to start filling that void. Business students should be taught creativity and arts.
And that's the thing. I remember being in a situation where I've just remembered that we'd been given I won't say who the business was, but the designer marketing had to come up with something to solve a problem that the business was facing, and we had to then present it back to the HR team, and they just didn't get it. They didn't understand why we'd done it. They didn't understand why it was going to cost so much money.
Yep.
And it was like trying to it was creative, it was a little bit disruptive. Um and in the end I had to kind of go back to my then brand manager and say, look, can you have a conversation with the team, because I feel like this is getting confrontational, and I'm just doing my job, but they just couldn't understand it. How do you, when you're working within a business and you've got to remain commercially viable and manage expectations of different departments, how do you
Mhm.
maintain that level of creativity and being disruptive when some people just don't seem to get it?
Create it with them. And I know that sounds easier than it realistically is, but the starting point should be to not create for them. It should be to create with them. It's a completely different thing, right? When you create for them, you still have to present and pitch and sell and defend and argue. And usually you'll end up being disappointed because things will get watered down. Okay. Pitches and sales can be rejected, right? Um, so creating with them, that that's a starting angle, right? But you also want to do what you can to know that you're working with people who do get it. And if they don't get it, try to teach them before you create, if you
Mm,
can. So
mm.
at this point, I have a little bit greater luxury than I know others do, and I understand that. But it took me a long time to get here. I won't work with anyone now who won't allow me and who won't acknowledge that this is what I'm doing, who won't allow me to have the opportunity to teach them how to be a great client, teach them
Wow.
where I'm coming from, right? Now, I'm not good at very many things. I know this about myself. I suck at most things. I'm really good at teaching a client how to be a great client. Okay. I won't do work for a client at this point. I will only do work with them. And not only that, I will only do it if I can work with them across all across all levels, across all functions, even if they are functions of the business that I don't understand. And the reason is because brand touches all of them, and all of them touch the brand. And again, I get it. I've spent enough time. I've fucked up enough. I've been mentored enough. I've learned enough. And I've earned the ability to be able to lay that gauntlet down. And younger practitioners will have to do the same thing because there are no shortcuts. Like, and I don't think that you were asking, like, what's the shortcut? What's the hack? Um, but we recognize that there are a lot of there's a lot of chasing those things, right? There are no shortcuts, despite what other people claim, right? There are no hacks, there are no formulas, there are no templates, there's no bullshit sales script that you can just memorize and role play and ride. to solve the challenge that you asked about. Because when you try that, all it becomes is a sale, and you reduce your role, you reduce the work to a sale. But it shouldn't be that. What the work that we do should be an invitation to create. We should be inviting them to create a better product, a better service, better process, right? Better packaging, a better experience, right? Greater value, right? What I said a few minutes ago, if you're talking about doing strategy with a client, what you're really talking about is creating a better future. Okay? It's not just creating a solution to their problem. The solution that they're looking for to the problem they think they have should create a better future for them, for their customers, for their shareholders, stakeholders, whoever they care about. Right? When you do that, when that creation is great, when it's legit, then it doesn't have to be sold. It's not a sale. And people always ask me, what do I love most about, whatever Marty has ever said or written? One of my top 3 favorite things is when Marty said, people hate being sold to, but they love to buy shit.
Yeah.
Right. So
Sure do.
if you want to go for like a bullshit promise of a shortcut or a hack or whatever you're doing, all you're going to be doing is selling. Right. And no one likes being sold to. So when it comes to working with a client, some people will say, like, it's all about the questions that you ask, and you have to be willing to just listen. You have to be willing to do that anyway. Like, yeah, shut the fuck up, listen to what they have to say. But you know what? That's not enough. People say, like, yeah, that's how you get paid for your thinking. I don't know. Listening and asking questions, that doesn't communicate anything about your ability to think. You actually have to think about who they are, what they're doing, what you're hearing. And you really have to be able to, like, diagnose, right? There's a pathology. There's something almost always underneath what you see, what you hear, and what you're observing, right?
Yeah.
But however you get there, it should be an invitation to co-create.
Yeah.
And if you're able to sell that, okay, well, then you want to know that whoever you're co-creating with can handle that, right? It doesn't go,
It's a
it's not a
two-way
one-way
thing,
street.
isn't it? It's a
It's a
two-way
two-way,
thing.
it's a two-way thing.
Yeah.
It's collaboration. It's so weird to us that we're like the only ones, we're the only program in this part of the sandbox that doesn't just talk about collaboration, but we try to change the way you think about it. We try to teach ways to think about collaboration. No one else does. And that's, like, bizarre to us, right? Because even if it's just Danielle Clarke on one side of the table, it shouldn't be you opposite your client. It should be you with your client.
Sat next
Like
to
that,
them.
it's just fucking
Yeah.
bizarre to us. So yeah, it says more about it says more about other people in the space than it does about us.
Mm. Okay.
Oh shit. Fucked up your day. Oh no.
No, it's like, when you were talking about you and Marty jamming, like, even in that, like, jamming, it goes back to when there's two people in the room and they're just kind of having fun, getting to know each other and seeing what comes out of that.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thought process, isn't it?
It's uncomfortable though, because so many people want to know that the time that they're investing, the resources that they're investing, the labor that they're investing in a jam, right? A brainstorm meeting, whatever you want to call it. They want to know that it's going to pay off, that it's going
Yeah.
to yield something. They want to guarantee. It's the same thing with strategy. You know, how do I know that my strategy is going to work? Well, you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
100, it is 100% impossible. It is not possible to predict or guarantee that it will work, that it will produce anything or yield or earn anything. Okay. There are ways to kind of test an idea, a strategy, a creative concept, right? You can prototype and test. That's one big way to do it. That's uncomfortable too. People don't want to invest the time or the labor or the resources, right? The costs to do that. Why? Because they're afraid that it's not going to work. Well, like who fucking who, right? But see, here's the thing:
I hear
the
that a lot.
brands that,
Not the
but it's
boo, not the
true,
boo-hoo. The how do I know if this is going to work? What results am I going
right?
to get?
Right, right. But here's the thing: it's not possible to guarantee or predict. Anyone who claims otherwise is either grossly misinformed, and I'm saying it that way because I think it's nicer than saying they're fucking idiots, and I didn't say that. They're either grossly misinformed or they're lying to you. It's one or the other. um, and so, you know, but we this is why, you know, when we teach, we try to share examples, case studies of brands that specifically, like demonstrably, have embraced this way of thinking, embraced this approach to building a business, to designing a product, to communicating to their audiences. Um, the brands that we all emulate, right, and look to as case studies, one of the things that they all share in common is that that's how they did it. They knew that there was no guarantee. They took risks. It's just what you have to do.
Mm.
There's no other way. There's no other way around it. Okay.
Do you think that's one of the? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about brand, or do you think it's something else? What's the thing that you hear a lot of that you think, oh, why does everyone think that? It's not true.
At this point, yes, I think that we the biggest misconception, the thing that more and more people are still getting wrong, and what upsets us is that it's being taught now, is that there's a shortcut. There's an absolute way, an absolute right and an absolute wrong way about this. But but generally, even above that, yeah, that there are these shortcuts, hacks, formulas, templates, right? Cheat codes. We understand the appeal of that. We get it because there are shortcuts for other things. There
Yeah.
are templates and formulas and frameworks that do make other things, other parts of business, other parts of life easier or shorter, or more efficient, right? I mean, we use some of them ourselves, but there is no shortcut or hack for brand. Like I'm just going to keep saying it. I've said it a million times. So is Marty. There's no shortcut. There's no hack for brand. There's no shortcut or hack for branding or for strategy. I mean, seriously, like anyone who says that, they're either like dangerously uninformed, or they're just lying to you, right? And what concerns us is more and more people who are really just like, they're just good at social media and becoming like a content shop and earning subscribers and followers, and even sadder, like now they just buy them. We know that they buy them, which, like, I can't even wrap, like, Marty and I have wasted too many hours like lamenting this. Like, what does it take to buy followers, but they do it. Okay.
Mm.
And what concerns us is those people, they build this kind of false audience, right? And then they start saying things like, well, I have X number of years. I have X number of years of experience in the C-suite. I've worked with some of the world's biggest brands. And, and they're doing that to imply that all of that experience was somehow finally able to reveal to them, right? Only to them, the all elusive hack formula secret cheat code. Do this, read this, take my class, follow this formula or template, and start charging 10,000 per client per project
Was it always
tomorrow.
10,000?
I don't know. It started as 5,000 and then they upped it. I don't know, in hashtag inflation, right? But that's what they do. And so do this and start earning this tomorrow, or do this and start getting paid for your thinking. Do this and this will happen, right? It's not real. It's a joke. It actually makes us sad, to be honest. And, I've never said this before. And between Marty and I, he's good cop. I'm like really hateable bad cop. But like, we kind of pity them. That's really sad, but we don't take them seriously. We don't recognize them as serious people. We don't trust them. We would never recommend or hire or work with or even refer to them. Because the only kind of person who claims to offer a hack is just a hack. Okay? The truth about this business is actually really simple, and it's historic, and no one ever challenges someone like Marty when it comes to this. This work demands creative and strategic thinking. It demands really multidisciplinary thinking, because people who think it's just all about brand, they are missing out. Brand is about business. Okay. This is about business at the end of the day.
Yeah, you can't.
Well, business demands a multidisciplinary thinking. It demands critical and analytical thinking. It demands a pain tolerance, right? For the kind of intellectual and emotional discomfort that you're going to experience, that you were talking about earlier. It's going to be your discomfort, your client's discomfort, your team's discomfort, right? It demands flexibility, it demands adaptability. But here's one other thing, and we've never really talked about this, but I'm going to, because this is where Marty and I are headed, to try to help address these misperceptions, right? These things that aren't just misunderstood, but they actually harm the space. They harm the space. It demands a maturity. Okay. It demands a maturity that, by the way, that doesn't just come with age or with time, right? Because, let's say let's say you're 50 years old, you have 20 years of experience, right? Whatever that may mean, right? Just because you may be 50 and have 20 years of experience doesn't mean you're mature enough to do this work. It's a maturity, right?
We
It's a
have this
maturity.
perception of that, though, don't we? That because someone's older, that they are mature
Yeah,
enough to be able to think a certain way, to take things on. Um, but it comes down to a mixture of it's mindset as well as life experience, isn't it? And you can have that mindset at any age if you're prepared to be, if you're willing to start thinking that way.
100%. So, the, the point I was about to make was, it's a maturity to be able to handle all the things I mentioned before. It's a maturity to be able to think in all of these different ways, and to develop the kind of pain tolerance that I described, right? but it's also a maturity to handle challenge. It's a maturity really to be able to handle being challenged, to having your thinking, to having your ideas, to having your work, especially your work, challenged, right? We describe it as a critique, right? I'm not just talking about just feedback. I'm not talking about, professional trolls on social media who, they just hunt under this masquerade, under like kind of their own false flag of like critique or open discourse or whatever. I'm talking about real professional critique. Critique happens across most roles and industries. I'll use the law school example. Law students are critiqued with grades and their performance in moot court, but then as lawyers, they're critiqued. They're critiqued by judges, among others. Judges are critiqued on how they interpret law and rule, right? So critique is nothing new, but it's not just about feedback. A critique is an exploration of ideas. Criticism is a part of it. Okay. Spotlighting weaknesses, flaws in thinking, flaws in execution. It's a part of it because it's insanely valuable, right? But it's only valuable if, number one, you're able to handle the criticism and understand what the criticism really represents. And number two, if it can lead to an evolution, a progress in your thinking or in that execution, right? So if you Danielle do a client project and you rebuild your client's website and you show it to me and you want feedback, if all I say to you is, Danielle, your design sucks, and I just leave it at that, then your reaction should be like, well, fuck you, because that's not valuable. It doesn't help you.
It's
it
not
doesn't help you.
constructive.
It's not, well, it's barely constructive because it doesn't really help you think about or see or even create a better version. That's what you want, right? So that's what a critique should be able to accomplish. But you, Danielle, you have to be willing and able, and you have to be mature enough to have that willingness and ability to get all of it, not just some of it. It's not just about the positivity. Okay. And so just to kind of bring this back around, one of the biggest concerns that we have about branding and the space these days is the absence of true, meaningful critique. And especially because of this culture of not just toxic negativity, but toxic positivity. Right? Any challenge is negative. It's bullying. We see it every day in our social feeds. We've all seen it. Someone posts something smart or stupid or meaningful or meaningless. It doesn't matter. Someone else comments with a question, okay, or a reaction that is meant to challenge the content. And what happens is they're instantly vilified.
They're chastised, and I've seen it.
They're demonized. They're accused of being a bully. It has happened to me. And you want to know what's worse than that? Here's what again, what really concerns us is when the person being challenged, they bitch and they moan and they cry foul and they get all holier than thou, like self-righteous, right? But they consider themselves to be one of those so-called experts or mentors, but they can't handle being challenged because their expertise is just, it's not real. It's an illusion, right? They can't handle being questioned because they know they can't answer, and they can't handle the critique because they don't have the maturity. They're not mature enough. They're not In some cases, not all cases, they may be smart enough, but they're not mature enough, right? And so you need all of that. You know, that really concerns us. And they're okay with charging money, a lot of money, to take their class, join their cohort, and they teach them to think this way, and they defend that. And we're concerned that there is this not just bullshitting, but there's this bullshaping of this landscape, right? We're not okay with that. No one should be okay with that, right? And for anyone listening, the next time you feel like you have to drop a fire emoji or like a love this comment or a yes exclamation point comment, like just please, like, think about what you're really reacting to before you react. Don't fuel toxicity, whether it's negative or positive, right? Don't give in to group think, group reaction. We think it's okay to challenge. You have to be professional about it. You have to be tactful about it. You have to be courteous about it. You have to be intelligent about it. Okay. But this work, this space, the landscape, it needs that. And if anyone bullies you, contact me, let me know. Right. We've always had, you know this, you took our class, we've always had critiques built into our master classes. And to
That's
your
my
point,
favorite bit.
it's we and what we've learned is it is everyone's favorite part of the class. And we didn't focus enough on them. And that's actually one of the big changes we're making now. We're going to be dialing up those critiques as much as we can. And we're going to begin offering them, not just more prominently in the class, but we're going to begin offering a new series of sessions. And they're going to be critiques, because it probably is the most valuable learning experience we can provide. And that's one of the main ways we are beginning to deal with these bigger problems, these bigger misconceptions and challenges in the branding space. Because to your point, we have had students in our classes who are, let's just call them newer in their careers, younger in their careers. They're not 50 years old with 20 years of experience. They're 26, 27 years old with a few years of experience. We have seen so many of them with a level of maturity, especially when it comes to critique, that just shames these so-called, seasoned experts, right? That inspires us. It gives us actually hope. Those are the kinds of people we want in our class. Those are the kinds of people that we want to partner and collaborate with. Those are the kind of people Marty and I look to for inspiration, right? For guidance, to shape the way we continue to think about this. Marty critiques me every time we talk. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not the most mature guy in any room, but I have just enough maturity and intellectual and emotional intelligence to know that when Marty critiques me, and Marty's brutal, it's the most valuable opportunity I will get that day.
Absolutely.
So
Wow.
don't be surprised if we start critiquing a little bit more, a little more loudly, a little more publicly, because without that, this field, this work, this discipline is at risk. And that's going to make it harder to sell the next client, to work with the next client, to be successful when you do work with the next client. Okay? Because critique goes both ways. You need to be able to critique your client. If you present work, thinking, an idea, right, an iteration, and your client reacts, you should be able to critique the reaction.
I had to do that today.
The people who are really good at this work are able to do that, and they prioritize it.
Yeah.
So there endeth that
Yeah.
sermon.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's been extremely insightful. I
Hope
thoroughly
so.
enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
What are you going to go and do now to relax, decompress from that?
You know, your timing is perfect. You know, I have a lot of things that I'm into, a lot of quirky hobbies and passions, but you see behind me, I'm a musician. Um, I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I'm mainly a recovering meathead caveman drummer.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of how I identify. Um, Music is my like outlet. It's like a reactor for me, creative, spiritual, emotional, and nothing calms me down and centers me more than music. But playing is like way beyond even that. So I just got this rocket ship
That looks
behind
awesome, man.
me. It's pretty awesome, and uh, I'm mentioning it really fast because it's such a core part of who I am, and it's actually played a role in level C. My identity as a musician. Marty is a musician. That's something a lot of people don't know about
Mm.
him. And that has influenced. That will be another podcast. We'll be writing and talking about it more coming down the road. But music is a part of level C. And this thing arrived a couple weeks ago, and I realized the last time I hit a drum for this was November 22nd, 2010. And so I went 13 years with a core part of me having been silent. And so a lot of my free time over the last couple of weeks has been me kind of becoming reacquainted with him. And
That's amazing, man.
it's really cool because I'm so freakishly curious now to see to see kind of what role
Yeah.
that Andy, like that Andy will play in level C going forward. Because like I said, music and musicianship, it's been baked in since the beginning. That kind of artistry, it lets us think about and see and hear things in this space about teaching, about business in ways that I don't think non-musicians can or would. Right. So that's kind of my free time now, every free second I get. And stay tuned because Marty and I feel like something like this and his own kind of creative outlets, writing, thinking about what he's writing, what he wants to write about, and communicate through that medium. We have really leaned into that for ourselves recently. And I say stay tuned because Marty and I feel like we're actually just waking up now. For the first time since Level C started, we feel like we're waking up. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to say anything else
Okay. I'm
about that right
excited.
now.
For a minute, I thought you were going to say you bringing out an album, but hey,
You never know.
you never know.
You never
You never
know.
know.
You don't
Thank
know.
you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Andy.
Thank you, my friend. This has been such a fun conversation. Anytime you want a follow up, especially if there's fallout, let's talk to the fallout if there is any.
I appreciate you. Thank you for
Absolutely.
speaking to us today. And yeah,
My pleasure.
catch you soon.
Catch you soon for sure.